This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so thanks again for joining and very good morning. Just to give a quick introduction for those who don't know me, my name is Adam, and I'm basically a technical architect by profession, and I'm also a trainer by passion. Okay, so with this, now when you try to go and check at the current trend in the market, so every organization is under a heavy competition. So that way, as an organization, what are the business goals that everyone is expected, right? So now, regardless of what type of organization they are, so we could have a product-based organization, or we would have a service-based organization where they take care of consulting. So at the end of the day, what is that as a business goal every organization is looking for? Okay, so if you see, the first and foremost thing what an organization is expecting is to do a continuous delivery. So when I say continuous delivery, like I said, depending on the nature of the business, they want to deliver their product or their service to the customers as soon as possible. So now let's say that if you talk about some of the e-commerce sites like Flipkart or Amazon, now for them, what is continuous delivery? So the page or the shopping page that we want to see should always be up and running, and any new products as a sale that they are trying to put should be getting displayed, and you should be having the details about it, the description about it, right? So if a guy or a user puts a review, those kind of things should be appearing so that you can look into it and do the shopping. So that way, for them, continuous delivery is to make sure that as a result of customers that we want to do the shopping, we have all those things available in the page. The same way, if you just go into certain sites or certain products like social networking, let's take an example of Facebook. So what exactly is continuous delivery for them? So again, we need to make sure that Facebook as an application is always available, and in that, any changes that they introduce has to come to us as an end product so that we will be able to access. So that is how, regardless of the organization into a product based organization or a service based organization, they need to make sure that they are delivering everything to their customers or the end users as soon as possible. Correct? So in the traditional method of releasing a software, it used to take years or many months. But nowadays, we are thinking about delivering everything in a fashion of week. So that is how things are changing faster. So when we have such a kind of requirement coming in the market, how is that as an organization we can deliver everything faster is what every organization's goal will be. But when we are talking about the delivery, where I have to reduce the time that we are taking to deliver something as a product or a service, we also have to give equal importance to what we call it as quality. Because just because we are delivering everything faster, if we compromise on the quality, what would happen? Our customers will not be happy, right? Now just take a same example that you are trying to do some shopping and suddenly they wanted to add more products, and because of that, if the images that they want to display is not of the high quality, or if the page is not getting loaded properly with improper contents, we will not be able to do the shopping. So that is where for a customer, it's not just that they have to deliver, but also have to deliver with higher quality. So that's when what happens. So when we are focusing about delivering everything faster with the better quality, the next thing what we have is the cost. Okay, guys, can everyone mute, please? Okay, so when we talk about the fast delivery and higher quality that we have to keep, there is another side which focuses is on the cost, because in order for us to get everything delivered faster and at the same time keeping the quality, how is that as an organization we can achieve? So it is possible only when if I put more resources or if I buy in more machines or more softwares. But if I add more and more resources, then what will happen? Typically, it is going to add more cost for the organization. Okay, so that is where, as an organization, now, if they are putting in too much of cost in order to produce a product or to service a product or to maintain a product, then what will happen is the selling point of it will always be higher, right? Now, just because let's take a product, if an organization is spending too much of time or the quality they have to improve and reduce the time, and because of that they are giving you a product with a better quality faster, but for that if the price is quite high, then in the market it will be quite competitive, right? So that is where now things like recession are coming, because they either invest too much of thing or they would have not been able to keep up the quality. So that is where for an organization, it's not just about delivering and keeping the quality higher, they also have to make sure how much of cost can be optimized. Okay, so this is again a huge goal for every organization. And finally, it's not just only these 3 points, but also something else called as outages. Now, this typically is major focus for organization who have a live production environment, like all the e-commerce business. Okay, and not just for e-commerce business, for every organization, we would have some kind of outages which will be happening. So what do you mean by outage? So typically outage means the time that we take to fix a problem or to update a software from old version to new version, or if there is some kind of an issue, how much of time that you're taking to fix. So in the same perspective, now think, if you are logging into Facebook and you are trying to, post some pictures, but you realize that you are trying to take a lot of time to see the comments and reviews from what your friends have put. Or typically, let me put it up in this way, what keeps us actually going back to Facebook again and again, or any kind of social networking? It's a simple business where they try to deliver everything and they make sure that it is always online. That's how I post a pic, immediately we go and check that how many people have seen it, how many guys have given me a review or a comment, right? That's what gives us happiness. The same way, how is that as an organization they are going to make sure? Because now assume that I put some picture, but immediately they say that, hey, wait, we are doing some upgrade, so because of that the application or the service will not be available. Will you be happy? No, right? The same way, like let's do some shopping, and while you're doing some transaction, if there is a disruption happens and they say that no, the particular website or the web page is not going to be available for certain time due to upgrade, then will we be happy? No. So that is where for organizations we need to make sure that the business is always running. So that is when any kind of issues has to be foreseen and they have to fix it at an earlier stage. So that is where the expectation from an organization is how proactive or how proactively we are going to find out if there is any problem and fix it, so that at an end the customers will be able to use our application always. The same way within an organization, any kind of software upgrades or issues that we have to fix, we need to fix it as soon as possible. Only then the time that we take as what we call it as outage will be reduced. So only when an organization can now have all those things, their business will be able to run properly. Okay, so this is what an organization is looking at. Now, if I say that the organization is looking at those 4 important points on delivering faster and ensuring the quality is high, at the same time cost has to be reduced and outages also has to be reduced. Now, how is that they are going to achieve? So in order to achieve, now there will be many people who have to work together, correct? So because it's not that one single guy will be able to do or help our organization run, so there will be different people who have to work together. So that way, if you go to the major technical side, we can divide the people who are working into it into two groups. So one, we can call them as a development group, the other one as non-development group or administration group or operations group. So when I say development group, it is not that you are going to write a program, but the set of people who are going to help in developing a product, testing a product, and releasing a product. Okay, so all of that is what together we call it as development group. And typically, who will be part of the development group? People like programmers or developers, QA engineers, release managers, build engineers, support engineers, and then program managers. All of them will be part of this development group. So anyone who is focusing directly on helping a release in terms of developing, testing, and deploying and supporting will be part of it. Okay. And on the other side, what do you mean by operations group? Now, these are the group of people where the development group will be directly focusing on developing and releasing a product. But to support that, there will be a lot of applications and machines that has to be taken care. And that is where the other side, which is the operations group or the administration group, will be taking care of an application or a machine. So anyone who is taking care of an application or a machine will be part of this operations group. Now under that, we will be having people or different kind of roles like system administrators, network administrators, database administrators, middleware administrators, or storage administrators, right? So their focus is to only take care of an application or a machine. Now, when we have people like this, which is in a traditional method, and every one of us have our own goals, right? Because if you go to developer, what his goal will be is to just write code and make sure that he can give it to the next person who can test it. And what will the QA do? Only when a developer completes his work, he will be just thinking about only testing. Same way, if you think on the other side, what will an administrator think and what he will be doing? So his role is to just make sure whether the machine is working fine or the application is working fine. So that's when all of us individually have a specific goal or a specific role that has been assigned to us. But the problem now is, how is that we are going to make sure that we will be able to achieve the business goal of an organization like continuous delivery? Or how do I make sure cost is reduced? Correct? How do I make sure quality is quite high? And how do I make sure that the outages that has been taken is reduced? So in order to do all those things, now the organizations are trying to put up a better solution which will help them to run the business with the required goals. So that's where the solution which an organization is trying to bring in is a process. Okay, so what is that process? So the process is nothing but, if you understand now, each one of us are working in silos and we don't actually think beyond the role or the responsibility given to us. That means the developer or QA will never care anything beyond development or testing. They don't care whether the machine is there or not there. We are just going to say that, hey, that's not my responsibility, right? I'll write code, I will test. So it's up to someone else's responsibility to take care. The same way, if you go into the operation side, what is that we will be doing in the operation? We will just say that, hey, I will just look into the machine or I will just monitor the application, nothing beyond it. But if you try to see, the whole software development life cycle is actually a chain. So just like how in a factory, if you want to make sure that a final product is being delivered, like let's take a car factory. Okay, now if I want to say that the cars should be delivered continuously and every day, let's assume that I would take 4 hours to generate a complete car and send it out to the road. So in that way, right from beginning, like taking up the raw material, forging it and making into a cast, and then you try to fit in a particular place, paint it and add some accessories, right? So there are different components that we have to fit in and then deliver it as a final product. So now in that way, even if one person doesn't work in between, you are not going to get the product delivered, because everything works back to back. The same way in an organization, if you think, it is not just that the developer has to do better, or QA has to do better, or the deployment person has to do better, or the system administrator or the application administrator has to work better. Now we want to work together collaboratively. So only when it's like the same chain in a factory, the software development lifecycle also involves all of us to work collaboratively. But how? What is the whole meaning of collaboration? So this is where the new culture which the organization want on each one of us to implement is a solution where, rather than thinking that we should be working in only one area, or so far, like I said, in a traditional method, if I'm a developer, I will think only on development. If I'm a QA, I should think only on QA. Or if I'm an administrator, I think only about my application or my machine. We never thought anything beyond it. So the solution what an organizations now are thinking is a culture where, rather than focusing on only one problem, we need to now collaboratively work in such a way that we try to take up responsibilities beyond what we are working now. Okay, which is what we call it as cross functionalities. That means if you are a system admin, for example, don't just think only about taking care of system related, but also think how we can help on the other side of the group, that is on the development group. Can we help them in an organization to do some development little better, or can we help them in doing testing little better, or can you help in deployment little better? So that is what they are looking at. Same way, if you are more like a database administrator, so far you would have been taking care of only database, but now as an organization's improvement, can you also focus on taking care of the machine in which your database is running? Can you take care of also helping an organization in some kind of deployments, right? So that is how each one of us are now expected to take some additional responsibilities. Same way, if you are into QA, don't just think of only doing testing, but for you to do the test, you also need a machine, and you also need someone to configure that machine and someone to deploy your product. What do you mean by deployment? Installing the product and bringing it up with the required spec. So that way, instead of someone else doing, we can also think of doing those activity. So that is where now DevOps is nothing but a culture in which organization is expecting us to take more responsibilities beyond what we are doing. So by this way, what will happen? All of us are taking up more responsibility. But when I say more responsibility, how can I take up the workload of two people and I can do alone? So then I need to focus on automation. So that is where now the DevOps process or the culture is not just about taking responsibility, but it's focused completely onto automating everything end to end. So only when I try to automate all the tasks that I have done and I can try to take up more responsibilities, it will be easy for me also to do the work. And at the same time, we will be able to do everything faster and with the optimal cost. So that's how the solution now, what organizations are trying to bring in as a level of culture throughout the organization, is this process where we should now
My
think not just.
voice is not audible.
Is it for you or for everyone? Am I audible to others?
Yes, yes, it's
Yeah,
audible.
you are audible.
I can hear.
You are audible, sir.
Thank you. Can you please
Yes, you are
reconnect?
audible.
If it is not audible properly, please reconnect. Okay. Yeah. So to continue, what I'm now telling is what organizations is expecting is we should be doing more work in how? That is by taking up more responsibility. And for that, we need to take more automation work. So you can think of it like a maid. Okay. So in our all our home, we will be getting some maid, right? So are you going to have a maid separately for washing clothes and one maid for washing your utensils and one maid for sweeping your floor? No, right? Typically, what we are going to do, so we are going to say that, okay, I'll have one maid who can do all the work, correct? So that is how the responsibility is being added. And at the same time, logically, you have to think, now, how is it possible that the single maid can do cooking, can do sweeping, and then cleaning and washing? Now, it's not possible. So that's where there are a lot of machines, automatic machines, that the maid or he or she should be using it, right? So that's the whole concept of automation is even coming from. The same way in an organization, now, if we are going to take up more responsibilities beyond our day-to-day work, so that the company can reduce the cost and try to deliver everything faster. So it is not that just 1 or 2% should focus on it. It is the expectation as a culture. Now, all of us should be working together. So that is where now DevOps is all about a culture in which we don't just focus on only the group where we are in and solving the problems. We should also check at how we can collaboratively focus, so that you focus on the improvements that is needed from the development group, as well as whatever the improvements or the problems that we have on the operation group should be taken care together. Okay, so such a kind of culture which every one of us has to develop, which is what an organization is expecting. Okay, so that's what is DevOps. So now, by saying DevOps, what is that we understood is it's a culture where we are expected to take up more responsibility and try to automate everything. Okay, so that is when, what are the things that you have to automate? So the next point which we have to understand is what we call it as the best practice, which is nothing but, okay, hey, I'm a developer, now how can I help testing? I'm a QA guy. How can I take care of the machine by myself? How can I do a deployment by myself? Or if I'm a administrator or a database or a storage administrator, how can I take care of the machine myself? How can I help a developer and QA? Now that is the next question that comes in. So that is where in DevOps we have what we call it as best practice. So best practice is nothing but it is also a process where you can try to do everything in a better way. So that's when, if you say that you are going to work in the culture called DevOps, you need to start adopting some practice using which you will be able to solve a particular problem that we have in an organization. So that is how these are the some of the major best practices which every organization wants to be implemented, and this is where each one of us will be focusing and we will be working to solve some problem. So from a higher level, if you look, what exactly is continuous development? So now developers are working. So now if I say that, hey, you should focus in not working in a traditional method, but in a latest method or a culture called DevOps. So what is it? So you need to start implementing some best practice. So in that way, should you know to write Java program, or should you know how to write a Node program so that you will have to be a developer? No. The expectation here is for a developer or for a product team to develop a product, is there something can you help? So that is where it is not just about writing program, because that is what the developer will be doing, but we can see what is the best practice he's using. Like, is he using the traditional waterfall method for development, or can you introduce some latest method like agile methodology? And in that, is there a proper release that we can set it up, so that instead of taking time to release 6 months or down the line couple of months, how can you try to reduce the release cycle? So that is where continuous development is a process where you are going to help in improving the development process. Okay, so that's where now it focuses heavily into agile, how you can improve the continuous development, so that when requirements are coming from the industry or from the customers, as an organization, how is that you can write the code and keep it to testing? So that is where it's not just about writing program, but it's more about the process. So by that way, we can help the developers to make sure that they are able to write the code properly, and they are going to deliver it to the next set of people who are called as the QA people. Now, in that, we also have to focus that it is not just about testing, but we have to automate our testing completely. And also, we should be able to test continuously when a developer is doing some change, right? Because when a developer is continuously doing development, or a group of people are continuously doing development based on the need or the requirement, we should also be equally testing it continuously. So that is where continuous testing is a process where we have to automate all our testing effort and make sure that if any new requirement is coming, we are also testing. And when I say testing, we know that there are different levels of testing, like unit testing, smoke testing, functional testing, regression testing, or we also call it as UAT, right? Or typically your final production testing. So that way, we need to focus how we can automate it. And in that, now if you see, we also need to have a process called continuous integration, which is a best practice, which tells us how can I integrate this development and testing, because both of them are two separate pieces. So whatever the developer writes, how can you integrate it different people? Because it's not that one developer is writing code. There will be many developers who are writing code. So how do you combine all of them and then give it to QA as a product? So that's where continuous integration focuses more about how do you take all the code which has been stored by individual developers, how do you convert it into a product, and how is that you're going to deliver it so that they can start testing. In the same way, now it's not just sufficient for us to only test it, but we also have to make sure that we are continuously delivering it to our customers. So that's where there is a best practice which we call it as continuous delivery. But now understand, whether you have to do a testing or whether you have to deliver it to your customer in production, we have to actually do what we call it as deployment. Deployment means installing your application, running your application, and making sure whatever is supporting it is available. So that process is what we call it as deployment. So this is where now we should also focus on automating our deployment process, so that if you want, whether as a developer or as a QA, you can also go ahead and do your deployment by yourself. Okay, so this is where here the process talks about how you can make sure that you can automatically deploy into QA environment or into production environment. Okay, so that's the focus about continuous deployment. But from all these things what we saw, this focuses heavily on the product development side. But how are you going to help from the infrastructure? So that is where, for any kind of requirement, whether you are developing or deploying or testing, you need machine. You need not just a machine, but the entire infrastructure. Like, I need a machine. Let's say that I want to deploy my application in cloud like AWS. Then what and all I need? I don't just need a machine, but you need to know that I need a private network, and in that network I need a particular security group so that I can tell what kind of access I should be having. And then inside that I might need a load balancer, and then on the load balancer I might need a machine, and in that machine also I want to have a particular type of machine. So how are you going to get all these things whenever you want immediately? Okay, and in that also, nowadays different organizations are having different requirement in the infrastructure. So let's assume that you are working in service based. Now one client wants AWS, another client wants Azure. So how are you going to manage everything? So that's where infrastructure as a code is a best practice. So by implementing this, you will be able to automatically create your infrastructure and manage it. Okay, so that is where, using infrastructure as a code, we will be seeing, regardless of what kind of cloud that you are taking, you should be able to easily create a infrastructure which is needed, which is what we call it as cloud agnostic. Then there is another process called configuration management. Now what does this talk about? So now, for all this activity, there are a lot of machines that you will be taking, right? Whether you are doing development or testing, or even if you are doing system administrator or database management or storage, there is some machine needed. Now in that, you need to install some application, you need to think about configuring certain things, you need to make sure that there is a specific file or folder is available, and you have to create users or give some permission. These are what we call it as configuration activity. So that's where in DevOps there is another best practice called configuration management, where we are going to have the process of automating the entire configuration needed on the machine. So that is how, whether if you are a developer or a QA or you are trying to deploy, or whether you are a DBA guy or a storage admin, you don't need someone else to help you with configuration. You can go ahead and automate whatever is the requirement for your machine to automatically configure, so that whether it is a development or a QA machine or a deployment or a storage machine, you can configure whatever it is needed by yourself and automate it. So that is how configuration management is a best practice, where we will see that if a machine is given, how can you automatically configure and make sure that the machine has everything that you need so that you can start your work. Okay, so this is another best practice which the DevOps talks about. And then we have monitoring. Now, what is this? So now understand, if you can automate development process and continuous testing and deployment and configuration, you will be responsible actually to take care of many applications and many machines. So let's say that you are a QA guy or you are a database administrator. Your responsibility is not just to automate some application running or not, but you should also make sure that it is always running, right? Because if it is going to be a problem, you need to find out and fix it immediately. That is what is the fourth goal of an organization. That is your, what is that, the outage time that I was talking in the first slide. So how do you make sure now your application is always running? How do you make sure that your machine is always running? So that is where it is now not just the system administrator's responsibility. Each one of us will be having so many machines under us, which is what will be our responsibility to take care, or there will be many applications which we will be taking care. So how are you going to ensure it is always available? That is when the process of continuous monitoring comes into the picture. So it is not that we should be just automating our work and leave it, but we should also be monitoring the machines and applications that we take care. So that is how we will be able to make sure that there is no bottleneck and all the things happen in a proper way, and we will be able to deliver continuously everything. Okay, so that is when it's quite important that all of us have to follow continuous monitoring in every aspect. And the last thing that now we have is security, because when DevOps started emerging, people were adding these kind of best practices, saying, hey, if you focus on this, this is the result what you're going to get. And that is how they came up with these best practices. But what's happening now is we are focusing on automating too many things, but we are not looking into security perspective. So that is where in DevOps, one of the best practice that they introduced is towards security, or what we call it as DevSecOps. Because for all the activity that you are doing, there will be lot of applications that we will be using. So now in DevOps, there is a new best practice that is added, which is called as security or DevSecOps, where we need to make sure each and every application that we are using or the product that we are creating is not just tested, but it is also verified against security compliance or vulnerability. Okay, so what do you mean by vulnerability? It is not just that your product is running and you are getting the expectations from the functionality, but if it is not secured, will it be good? No, right? For example, I'll just take a bank transaction. So are you happy that let's say, like, not exactly like Flipkart, just an example, Flipkart or Amazon, they are just trying to deliver everything to you faster so that you can do your shopping or you can look into the site. But when you are trying to do a transaction, if that is not secure, then you will not be using it, right? So that is where it's not that an organization has to just focus on these best practices, but at every step, when they are trying to create a product or if they are using any application or machine, we should also focus on how the security will be tied up to it. So that is where DevSecOps is something which is adapted at every level of your implementation. So it is not that only the last product will be secured. So you need to think that whenever you are implementing any best practice, there is going to be a tool used, and for that tool, how secure is your tool, and at the same time, how secure is your machine, and the final product that we are going to give to the customers, how much of things that it is secured. So that's another best practice that we have to implement. Okay. So now if you understand, as an organization, to develop a product, to test a product, and to deliver a product, we need all these practices to be implemented. Okay. So that's where you have to think now, is it possible that a single person can do all these things? Now, typically, again, it's not possible because we are talking about development, we are talking about testing, we are talking about deployment, we are talking about infrastructure and monitoring. So that is where in an organization, what we are going to do is they are going to have something called as a role, wherein they will be trying to assign certain best practices so that you will be using certain best practices and implement or give a solution to an organization. So that is how, if you look, there will be certain organization who focuses majorly on the development and testing improvement. Then there will be a profile or a role which is given to you, which is called as CI/CD. So that way, if you now work under this profile, you will be focusing heavily on continuous development, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous testing. So this is what is the best practice you will be focusing. Now, if you are going into more onto an organization where their focus is heavily on the data center automation, because now for them they have huge number of machines, and the data center or the lab what they have is quite huge, and they want to focus into maintaining it, then they will be going into another role called as cloud administration. That is where you need to understand what type of cloud, and you have to take care of the entire data center rather than available in physical or in virtual machines. You are going to now take care of completely on the machines which is available on the cloud like AWS or Azure or GCP. So here in the cloud administration, your focus will be heavily on managing the cloud. However, now if you look at the programmers, or let's not say programmers, let's talk about the programming managers or release managers. Now this is where what is that you can do for DevOps. Now rather than just focusing only on the traditional method of working, you need to now get adapted to agile process. So that is where you need to focus how your project can be delivered in an agile way. So that's how there is another set of role which is majorly for your management. And then finally, now if you look, we also have something called as site reliability. Now this is where it is a combination of couple of roles, because now there are organizations where they will ask you to combine couple of roles together and create a new role. So that way, if you talk about SRE, now SRE doesn't just talk about cloud administration, but along with cloud administration, we might also be required to do certain tooling automation which is needed for organization. So in that case, now if you add cloud administration with some additional tooling, then that profile is called as SRE. So this is how in an organization nowadays what is happening is, it is a combination of few roles put together. They will be defining you a new role and responsibility or a designation. But you need to understand, it is not possible by a single person or a single group of people to focus on all the best practices that we were talking. But however, it is quite necessary for us to improve the chance of growing and getting hired. We should be knowing all the process which is available. But however, we need to now understand which side of the DevOps that you're going to take. So that way, are you going to focus completely onto the cloud administration, or are you going to focus more into automating everything, which is again going to be cloud, but not 100% on the cloud administration, but more focus onto the automation which can run on cloud. Okay. Then the next thing is, keeping aside the roles, from a generic perspective, now if an organization is expecting their business goal, so that is where now each and every person who is going to work in an organization, there is some expectation, because that is where when you go to an interview, what is that they expect. So these are the characteristics which they are looking at. So the first one, what an organization is looking at in each and every one of us is, are you a generalist? Which means don't just say that, hey, I'm an expert with so much of experience in one domain, I'm not ready to do any other activity. So now if you see, the basic concept of DevOps is, are you ready to take up more responsibility? Correct. So that is where, if you are been working so far in system administration, now you need to also be ready to solve some problem towards the testing improvement or deployment improvement. The same way, are you a QA guy? Don't just say that I will focus only on the QA problem, but I'm ready to also take responsibility to do some deployment or do some monitoring for the activity that you're doing. So that is how they are expecting us to be a generalist, so that any kind of new problem is arising, we should be ready to solve. And in that way, when you're ready to take multiple responsibilities, it is again not possible to just do everything manually. That is where the focus is 100% automation. The more and more you can automate, the more responsibilities that you can take up. But how are you going to do this automation? That is when you need to know best practice, because automation is not just about using a tool. You need to know what is the best way to work on that. So for that, if you go back to the previous slide that I said, you need to know now what problem that you are trying to solve for an organization, and what is the best practice that you should implement. And it is again not just about using a tool or a automation, but you should also focus on operational excellence. So operational excellence means, how is that you're going to make sure that everything is running better? Because let's assume that I am giving you an activity of automation. You should not be just thinking about having a tool and automate, but you should also focus how effectively are you going to maintain it, right? Because for an organization, maintenance cost is also going to be added to the year-end goal. So that is where it is not just about doing automation, but how effectively you are trying to do the automation, and how much of lesser maintenance work that you are going to have, which is what every organization is looking at. And finally, the expectation now from an individual is not just about doing some automation and leave it. If there is a problem, how are you going to collaborate with different people and try to solve? Because I told you this word, that it is not possible for a single person to work on all the best practices. If a problem is being given to you and you are owning it, you should be taking the responsibility and driving that to a solution. What do you mean by driving? Now let's say that you are focusing on implementing the best practice, or you are working on the best practices like CI/CD, continuous integration and delivery. Now, if there is a problem that has been assigned to you and you have to solve it, it might be required for you to work with the administration team or work with different set of people to deliver what is needed. So that is where, how are you focusing on that? Because if you look at an interview, they'll also check, are you collaborating with different team? Are you focusing on delivery point, or you're just trying to do some work and leave it, right? So that's where resilience is all about. How do you take responsibility by yourself and deliver it to the end? Because it is not necessary that a single person should be doing everything, but you should be taking the responsibility in working with different people to deliver it. That is whole the point is. Okay, so these are the expectations from the characteristics as an individual when you say that from the traditional method you're more working in the DevOps culture. And finally, now if you see, how can you do all this best practice? So that is where tools comes in. So best practice is nothing but, you are going to take one tool or combination of multiple tools and try to automate and see how it can fit best for a problem or a solution that you can provide for helping a organization. So that is where, for each of the best practice that I told, there are tools available. So if you talk about infrastructure as a code, now typically we have Terraform, so that using Terraform, you can connect to AWS or Azure or GCP, and you can automate your infrastructure creation. Same way, for configuration management, one of the best latest tool what we have is Ansible. So using Ansible, you can configure a Windows machine or a Linux machine that can be used for administration or database or storage or for your development or for testing. Then, if you talk about deployment, then we have tools like Docker and Kubernetes, using which you can deploy your application on a QA environment or a production environment. Then, if you talk about monitoring, right? So we have many tools like Prometheus and Grafana, where you can use to monitor a particular machine, or you can also monitor your application, right? So it's not just that monitoring means only machine. You can monitor a machine, you can monitor a particular service or application, or also if you talk about Docker, you can also monitor your container. Okay. And then if you're talking about CI/CD process or continuous integration and continuous delivery, that's where tools like Jenkins comes into the picture. And now if you talk about continuous development, then it is about implementing agile methodology and using tools like Git, GitLab, Gerrit, Bitbucket, right? So that's how it's all about combination of different tools, but you need to know there is specific tool which will help us to implement a particular best practice. Okay, so now coming to the final point. Okay, so now we know that what is DevOps, what is the company expecting in DevOps, and what are the best practices available in DevOps. So how is that now as an individual we can start changing our profile to DevOps? So if you have to change your profile to DevOps, the first thing you need to go back and understand is you need to take more responsibility. So that is where, instead of you being working on development or testing or administration, how can you take additional responsibility? Now for that, I told you that you need to first automate your work, right? Because suddenly if I'm coming and telling to you, hey, okay, you are a storage guy or you are a DB guy or you are a QA, take additionally another responsibility. Now how can you take a responsibility unless and until you have time? Now to get time, what you have to do, you need to automate whatever you are currently working. So that is where DevOps starts with that. So first you should think, I am working, and when I am working, there is some activity that I am focusing, and it will be directly related to one of the best practice that I am talking about. So that is where you should first think how you can automate your current work, and you can start working on any one of the best practice. Because if you are a QA, you have to think of continuous testing, or if you are a developer, think of continuous development, and then think of implementing continuous delivery, then think of continuous deployment. Same way, if you are an administrator, right, or a DBA guy, or if you're focusing on support, think about how can you implement configuration management, then think how you can implement infrastructure as a code, then think how you can do a continuous deployment. So that is how you need to start automating your current work, and from there you need to think what are the additional roles and responsibilities that you can take up. So that is how you should be developing your cross functionality skills. So it is not something different. So each one of us, whatever we are working, right, we can automate the work, and it will be part of one best practice that I showed you. So that is where we need to understand that how we can take it. So that way we can start with our work, automate it, and slowly start implementing other best practices, so that your profile will be completely, by knowing all the best practices, you can keep moving up. Okay, so this is where now what it comes is you need to think of choosing your profile. So that is where you need to first understand, do you want to start focusing on the DevOps role, which is focused into the cloud automation side, that is towards the tooling side, which is regardless of what kind of cloud that you take, you are going to focus on the tooling, or you are going to focus only on the cloud administration side. So depending on it, you need to start focusing what are the best practices that you are going to take. So that is where, from more generic, if you are focusing on the tooling side and you are focusing more on the automation regardless of what cloud has been given, then it is quite necessary that you need to start with these best practices, right? So that is how you should start learning best practices one by one, and from there you should be adapting by learning tools But when you're going into this, there are certain prerequisites which is needed. Okay, so that is when, if you're starting to think about moving into DevOps, then it is quite necessary that you should have some good knowledge on Linux, not as an administrator, but to do your day-to-day operational work, or to help you to day-to-day triage and fix some problems. And you should also be knowing scripting. Now, scripting is different, program is different. We are not expecting, or as an organization, no one expects you to write a Java program, but you should be knowing some basic scripting. Why? There are many activities that you have to do which might not be done using some tool. So for that, you might have to write some 2 lines or 3 lines of script. For example, I ask you to delete 100 files. Is there a tool for that? No. For this simple thing, you can go and write a small script which will delete it. Or I'm asking you, hey, can you please send mail to 100 people? Now, for these kind of activities, you need to think of using scripting. So before you jump in, the basics that we need everyone to be aware of is the Linux basics, and you should have good scripting knowledge. Which scripting? Either if you're talking about Linux, then shell scripting is good, so that any activity that you can think of later can be automated. And this is how you're going to learn different best practices and tools around it. And finally, you can get into programming, or you can get into the cloud administration. So this is one roadmap where, if you are more from a non-administration background, right? So if you are not into core system administration, then you can think about taking this, so that you can start moving into DevOps. And later on, if you understand, the beauty of DevOps is it is not limited. The more and more you know, you can try to take more and more roles that if I've shown you there, so that your chances of growing high will be typically lateral. So it will be like very fast for you. So that is how you need to keep moving in this way. Same thing, if you are focusing more into the administration side, then this is what you have to do. So now you have to choose whether you have to go into AWS or whether you have to go into Azure. So that is the next thing that you have to think. So in that, what you're going to do, you're going to start thinking on the level, because there are different levels. Just like how I told best practices in the other side, if you take AWS or Azure, there are different levels. So depending on what level of your goal that you want to achieve, you have to start taking up your certifications accordingly. Okay, so the same way, similar to AWS, in Azure also we have different roadmap. So now finally, if you go back, what is that you have to decide? Are you going to start with the administration of the cloud, or do you want to start with more about the tooling side, where it focuses heavily on the automation side? So that is how, depending on that, you are going to take by learning the best practices and then moving forward. Because now I can start with the tooling side, and then I can add more programming like Python, and I can add administration like AWS or Azure. That is one roadmap. If not, you can start with your cloud administration, but for that you need to choose whether it is AWS or DevOps in Azure, and then you should think of learning the generic DevOps processes and the best practices. So it's all about where do you start, but the problem here is not to just stick with one. The more and more you learn, that is where multiple roles can be taken. So it's like a hotel. When you go out, have you seen how hotels work? So they'll be displaying many foods they have, right? So you can just choose which one you want. The same way, you should be learning all those things in such a way that if you are knowing on all the roles and responsibilities what a DevOps can take under all the best practices, then your profile will be outstanding, right? So that you can match all the requirements what an organization is giving up. Okay, so that's what I had. So that now, if you understand the focus, what we are trying to do is, when we say DevOps, we are going to learn more from the best practices, in which we have to start learning all the processes. But for that, you need to first know the fundamentals on Linux and scripting. With that, you will be able to learn all the processes one by one. And in that, you are going to not just learn only the process. So the way that how we are going to learn is, we are going to first say, okay, what is the problem statement? And in that problem statement, what is the best practice, and in the best practice, what is the tool that we are going to use. And now when you are learning the tool, you need to learn the tool scenario based. And once you learn the tool in scenario based, next you need to take up a project and try to see how you can implement. And when I say project, you should be seeing how you can relate multiple tools and you can do a automation end to end. And you should also think about what are the maintenance activities that you can do. So that is how you will be able to relate it to your individual profile. And when you go out and talk, it will be more proper, that people will understand you have not just used commands, or you are not just talking about commands, you are talking more from how problem can be solved, and it shows that you have worked really. So that's what we call it as more of real time. Okay, so this is what I wanted to tell, and I'm open to questions now. Thank you.
Yeah.